have here the Tantive IV from Star Wars. This is by Fantasy Flight Games for the X-Wing miniature game. And we're going to see if we could repaint this model and try to get a bit more accurate paint scheme, better looking paint scheme on it. And so I'm doing this for people who are interested in repainting their models, but also for model builders who are looking for Star Wars or themed model kits that are not available regularly in the standard model kit form. So we're going to find out if we can make this into a display quality model kit. And start off with the detail, the accuracy of this. And I have examined the original photos of the original Tantive IV. Found some very good ones online. And I gotta say, this is pretty darn accurate. I did not find too many inaccuracies on it. Most of what I found was due to the scale of it. So some of the detail is a little soft here and there, but overall it is pretty accurate to the original model used in the film. The only one major inaccuracy I found was this area right here where this wing connects. This little triangle bit comes out. It should actually angle in, but that was the only major thing that I found. So pretty good on the details. The kit is made out of a very hard styrene, and it's put together with super glue of some sort. You can see some still stuck there when I ripped off the engines. I pulled off the engines because a couple of them were a little angled like that, and also to get easier access to the secondary set of engines for painting. So these I just managed to use a bit of force and snap off. You can possibly break down the kit even more, but I don't know exactly where all the mounting points and seam lines are, and I didn't want to risk breaking it. There is a fairly nasty gap right there. Not as bad on the other side, but that is a little bit difficult to fill. Other than that, pretty good. The paint scheme is, it's okay. There's some inaccuracies with the little colored swatches here and there. There should be an extra one here, and there's not, and one or two of these is off. The red used here is much more distressed than it is on the original model. Also, it's a bit too bright, I believe, though it's kind of hard to tell with photos, with photoshopping photos and correcting them for color, but it seems like the red is a bit too bright, but it is definitely way too stressed. If you're going to repaint one of these, I wouldn't be too concerned with removing the paint that's currently on them. I've tried removing paint from these type of models before, and whatever they use in China to paint these it fuses into the plastic. It's very hard to get off. I did give it a light bath in purple power and managed to remove a majority of the black wash that they use all over it. So I did manage to take that off, but I didn't really bother trying to take off the rest of the paint. So that's about it. Let's get to the painting. We begin in the airbrush booth, and I primered the ship with some all-clad white primer. And my original plan was to just work off the white primer, use that as the base coat. However, it was a bit too stark, a bit too bright. The ship is supposed to be white, but it's also supposed to be weathered. So I wanted something a little bit darker, and therefore I went over the primer coat with some Vallejo Model Color Pale Sand. I then sprayed some very thin white, mainly concentrating on the panel lines, but applying the white over the pale sand allowed some of the pale sand to still show through, and the end results was not as stark as it was with just the white primer or a straight white base coat would be. My original plan was to mask off and airbrush all the colors on the ship, but due to the fact that the ship is pretty much all together and the amount of little greebly bits on it, there's no way I can get the tape to stick without getting paint underneath the tape. So went with hand brushing instead, and
the key when painting a flat surface like this, you need to use thin layers and use a lot of them. So there's about 4 layers of red on this particular area here. Also, I originally thought the red on the original model was a bit too bright, but after looking at some different resources, it's not as inaccurate as I thought. But for the red, I ended up using Vallejo Model Color Flat Red mixed with about 40% regular red. Not including the red, there's 3 different colors of panels on the ship. First one being the darker gray ones, which I use Vallejo Model Color Cold Grey for those. For the yellowish panels, I used Vallejo Model Color Buff. And then finally for the light gray panels, I used Vallejo Game Color Stonewall Grey. To distress the paint, I took the easy route and simply scraped it off. Using my various metal wax carving tools, I just scraped off the paint in accordance to where it's supposed to be on the original studio model. And you have to be careful. I'm just trying to get the paint off here, not gouge the plastic. Also, this is only something you can do when you have a light colored plastic model. If this kit was originally in obviously a green plastic, I couldn't do this because then the green would show up, but since it was molded in a light gray or white, this works because then it somewhat matches my original white base color. To distress the paint a little bit more, I then carefully sanded it with a sanding stick, and you have to be cautious because one too many little swooshes of your sanding stick and you can peel off way too much paint. So this is very effective, but you just have to be careful when you do it. The front of the ship has a little bit extra depth to the scratches, and I replicated that by using some German Grey, very carefully painted inside some of the rubbed off now gray colored areas. In fact, the front of the ship has so much damage to it, I had to paint in some additional scratches by using, once again, Vallejo Game Color Stonewall Grey. And when you're painting scratches and chips like this, this is about the only time you want a shaky hand, because you want a broken, irregular pattern. So if you could almost force your hand to shake a little bit to paint all these scratches in, it actually ends up being more effective, and it reduces the chance of you forming a pattern with your hand, which is always something that happens when you're painting chips, where you start going dot, 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 dot. You start naturally creating a rhythm, then it makes all the scratches look the same. Keep it irregular. Before moving on to the enamel washing stage, I gloss coated the entire model with some Pledge with Future Shine, that's acrylic gloss coat. And before going on with the overall wash, I decided to add a little bit more variation in the panel work. So I went around with various colors of the MIG filters that I have and just added some extra color to the panel work here and there. A little dark brown, a little light brown, a little gray, just so there's a bit more variation. After letting the final filter dry for about 15 minutes, I went around with a Q-tip and cleaned them off. And even though there's some in the recesses, the main idea was to get the color just on the panel work. And you can see how some of the panels are a slightly different color now. Once I do the overall wash, that will get blended in. But the hope is that subtle color variation in the panels will add to the model once we're all done. After letting the enamels dry overnight, I gloss coated the model once again, and then I began on the overall panel wash. and I'm using MIG's Neutral Wash, which originally I planned this just as another weathering layer. I did not plan this to be a panel wash because I didn't think it would be dark enough. However, I never used it over white before, and it actually ended up being the perfect shade for this model. After letting the wash dry for about a half hour, all you have to do is remove it, leaving it in the recesses. You can remove it just like before using a t-shirt or a Q-tip. Actually a combination of both. T-shirt for the big panels, Q-tip for the delicate areas and the hard to reach areas. Now here's where things get a little bit difficult. On the original studio model, they added weathering by simply slapping a black wash over certain areas of the model or spray painting certain areas black. And that looks fine in the movie where you don't get an up-close look at the model, but when it's something you can get close to and play with a few feet away from your face, it would just look terrible if I just airbrushed a bunch of black and did a bunch of black washes on the kit here. But I needed a bit more weathering, and what I decided to do was add more scratches, the same way I did to the front essentially. I went around the whole ship trying to place them in logical areas, but mostly all over the place. Just tiny scratches using Vallejo Game Color Cold Grey, just like we did in the front. And again, when you're doing scratches, it's important to not get uniform, which is kind of hard to do when you're using the same motion over and over again. Try to break up the motion that you're stabbing, touching the brush to the model with. Kind of go da 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 da. Don't get a rhythm in your head. Turn the brush slowly in your hand so it's using different sides. All little things like that will help all the scratches look differently and less uniform. And again, just like on the front, a little bit of German Grey in the center of some of the scratches helps to give a bit more depth to them. After applying one final coat of gloss varnish to protect the previous enamel layer, started adding some streaks using AK Interactive's Streaking Grime and Rust Streaks and all the other various brown ones I have. The original model does have a lot of rust on it for some reason. So just going around various areas, putting some lines. We're going to clean this up in the next step. Also played around with one of their new washes that I picked up for aircraft. It's for aircraft of landing gear on aircraft. However, it's just a straight black wash, which, since they used a lot of black washes on the original model, came in really handy here. And then after letting the streaking grime dry for about 15 minutes, just rub it carefully off, not entirely off with a Q-tip, but trying to define it to soften the look, to get rid of the hard edge on that the brush caused, and to gently blend it into the sides of the ship. The final thing to do was to spray the soot around the engines, and I did that with some very thin Vallejo Model Color German Grey. Didn't want to use black, I wanted something that was a bit more subtle that I could slowly build up to a darker color, and just sprayed it around the engines, dull coated the model, and we are done. And with that, the Tantive IV is done. And I gotta say, I got mixed feelings about this project. It definitely looks better than the original paint job, but I'm wondering if people could even tell the difference. If both were side by side, hopefully they would pick mine as looking better, but if I just slipped this back into the packaging and slipped it onto the shelf at the game store, I'm kind of wondering what people would think, if they would even notice it. This is my first time ever repainting a factory painted model, and it's kind of interesting. I'm not painting on a blank canvas, I'm repainting what someone else already did on that same canvas. It's an interesting feeling, but there we are, our somewhat shiny new Tantive IV all done, and thanks for watching.